Astro does something that nobody else does, and that is it gives you type-safe markdown. That means you can actually have data files locally in your project and get type safety automatically. Now, these can be markdown files or MDX files, JSON files, or YAML files. And did you know there's actually two different types of content collections? There's the content type, that would be for things that you're actually rendering content, and then there's the data type, which would be metadata only. In this video, we're going to do a fairly fast walkthrough of kind of how all of this fits together. We'll start with a very visual diagram of how it works so you can understand it conceptually, and then we'll actually build this out live. Now, I'm recommending that you have an idea of how this works already since we're going to be moving so quickly, but I want to do something for people who are kind of already familiar, but want to just kind of up their game with content collections. And I hope this will be a big help. You ready? Let's jump in. Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome to Coding in Public. All right, so what exactly are content collections? I'd like to start by kind of graphing this out, and then we'll actually code this out live, but that way we get the concept first, and then we actually do this in practice. Now, if you want a deeper dive, you can sign up for my Astro course at learnastro.dev, where we'll do a much deeper dive and do several projects related to content collections. All right, so content collections are the best way to manage and author content inside any Astro project if it's local data. But there are some times you'd want to use it, and there's times you would not want to use it. So let's talk about both of these. First of all, when you'd want to use it. Well, this is really best if you have local data files. So in other words, you have data that's actually stored in the repo that you're pulling from to actually build out your pages. The other option is if you're using some kind of CMS that actually uses content collections. So I know, for instance, Cloud Cannon uses your content collections and then builds your site from that. So that would be another thing you can do, and you can actually add to those using some kind of CMS platform. And there are lots of them that do that. So this is basically when you'd want to use it. And the obvious idea here is that you want type-safe content. So that way, when you're actually referencing your data, you're actually seeing exactly which properties you have and can pull them in immediately. It also catches errors and things like that. So as an example, we're going to have authors, and each author can have an image. Now, I want to make sure this is an actual image file. And with content collections, I can actually say this has to be an image file. And I can even specify exactly what size I want it to be. And then that way, when I go to build my site, there's no possibility of there being an error because it will catch that on build. So that's an example of the benefit of using something like content collections. Now, there are still use cases where you would not want to use it. So for instance, maybe you have remote data that you can't have any control over. Well, you can't use content collections there because content collections have to be local to your repo. Secondly, maybe you say, hey, I don't want to create extra routes. So in the example we'll show in a second here, you see that I can have a markdown file in the pages directory. That markdown file automatically generates a route. So I don't have to do any extra work for it. You can see how I don't have to create a route and like dynamically generate routes based on certain schema. I just drop a markdown file in there and it builds automatically. Now that might seem really convenient and nice, but honestly, I do not think it's worth it because of all the benefits that content collections give you. The final thing would be if you're not comfortable with TypeScript or Zod, you don't need to know a lot, and that's what I want to really set you at ease with. Even if you don't know a ton about it, you can very quickly get up to speed and do everything you need to do to use content collections and nothing more. So this is how you'd use it, when you'd use it, when you would not use it. How does it actually work in practice? That's what I want to look at next. Basically, you have a folder, it's called content, and the only thing that goes in this folder is your config file and then any kind of markdown, MDX, YAML, or JSON file. The other thing they've added recently is you can actually have images in here as well so that you can reference them using the image component by Astro. So the config file is very simple. You basically just have a JS file or TS file that has one export const collections. This is an object that references properties relating to your different folders. So here in this example, I've got posts, authors, and services. Now here's the final code we're going to build. And you can see here that we've got posts folder, we've got an authors folder, and we've got a services folder. So these have to correspond to the right names. And then you can define them up top here, or actually in the final project here, you can see that we're going to define it directly in line. Either way it works. Basically, you just have to have this const export. Now, you can define it up top here like I'm signifying with these three dots, or you can actually write it inline, and that's what we'll do in our final project. Either way, these will reference actual content. And in recent versions of content collections, they've added the ability to have two different types of content in your content collections. You can have what's called content types, or you can have data types. And basically, this is the kind of data you're expecting to store in these content collections. One can be in Markdown or MDX files, and the other in YAML or JSON files. So when would you want to use one over the other? Well, a content type is meant for documents that have large bodies of text. So like several paragraphs, something like that, you actually have content and then maybe metadata related to that. So for instance, here's my posts one, and maybe I have a title, a description, an author, and a date. Now that's fine. Each of these individual files then will live inside this post directory. They will have front matter, and then they'll have their actual content. So this would be like a post by this author with this description, with this title, and with this date. But there's actual content that we're rendering in addition to the metadata up top. The other kind you can have is what's called the type of data. This will be in YAML or JSON files. And you can see here that we've just got name, a bio, headshot, role, and email. So there's no actual content we're rendering. It's just metadata about this item. Now, each of these documents will live inside the folder corresponding to it. So like team, these will live in the services folder, and they'll all have this descriptive metadata. But notice that I've got a couple of items. Number one, you might notice that here I have this services that might be tied to the contact. So this contact right here, I'm saying I want it to point to one of my team members. So it's going to actually point to one of these files essentially. So maybe I have somebody named Sarah. Well, this might be Sarah's document under the team directory. And the services can reference that. So it's almost like you're creating a little database here just with data files. Now notice that you can go across these as well. So if I come back over here, maybe I also have an arrow that points here from the author. This will do the same thing. So this author right here is going to also point to one of these team members. So technically, I guess it would point down to one of these, but basically something that lives in the team directory. Now, this can go in multiple ways, and in fact, you can even reference posts here. So we'll do that as well. So for instance, you might have something like referenced posts, and these could actually point back to themselves. So for instance, they would point down to another one of these posts, not the current one that you're referencing. So this type safe system gives you the benefit of basically seeing all these things type safe, but you can also reference them as well. All right, so hopefully that gives you an understanding of how it works, how you'd organize it, and how you'd use it in a real life scenario. Now let's actually build out a real life project. So in a terminal, I'm just going to type npm create Astro at latest. You have to have node 18 or above, I believe, but then we'll just say content collections overview. All right, perfect. Let's go ahead and just use an empty project so we can build this out from scratch, and we'll install the dependencies. And in my case, I'll go ahead and plan to write with TypeScript. It does actually help a little bit. So if you don't write in TypeScript, you'll have to do a couple of other changes that I'll try to remember to call out for you. All right, so there we go. We got everything up and running. I've got a Git repository ready. I'm going to go ahead and open this up in my code editor, and I'll be right back with you. All right, now with this open in my code editor, just to keep things simple, I'll go ahead and use the local terminal here and do npm run dev, and this should get us up and running. And I'll open over here, localhost 4321. All right, so there we go, our very basic site. Now, I'll jump back over here just to mention that if you ever get stuck at all with content collections, I've done a more in-depth video on setting all this up. We'll be going over this, but I'm not going to be explaining each little detail as I did in that video. But you do need to know a couple things. Number one, like I mentioned, this is the kind of the structure, but especially if you are using this without TypeScript, you'll need to make a few changes if you didn't use the strict or strictest version. And if you didn't do that, just follow these directions right here. I won't go over that this time alone. All right, let's go ahead though and define this schema. And remember, we're going to do that inside our SRC and inside that folder called content. So inside here, let's go ahead and create another file. We'll call this config. And I'm going to do .ts. Obviously, you can do JS as well if you'd like to. Now to make this a little simpler, let's go ahead and just copy all of this as a starting point. And I'll close this down and get rid of this right here. You may see this red squiggly line right here. All that means is that we haven't actually used content collections yet. So it's looking for like all the type definition and it's saying, hey, you're trying to pull from this, but I don't have it anywhere. So it'll actually build that here in just a second. So you can see that what I've got here though is now I'm going to define a type collection. And I actually like to just do this directly in line just to make it a little bit simpler. So for instance, I could come in here and have like a blog like this, and then just point it directly to define collections. You can do it outside too if you prefer that. It honestly does not really matter. The important thing is that you're just exporting a const called collections, and it does need to be called that. Now up here we've got Z, this is Zod, which allows you to create type safe properties for each of the items in this object. Now, we're not going to get super complex with this, just enough to kind of basically understand it. You'd then define a collection for each of the folders that you'd have. So in this case, we wanted to call this posts. So let's change it to posts. And this means that I need a folder called posts right over here. So let's go ahead and do that. Posts. And then let's go ahead and create a markdown file. And we'll just call this post1.md. Now remember, anything that's going to be a type of content, which is what this will be, needs to be an MD file or an MDX file. Let's come over here then, and you see here we've got a type of content, and as of 2.5 and later, this is basically saying, hey, this is going to be a content file, not just a data file. Now, if I move back over this way, you'll remember we have a title, description, author. We'll actually have reference posts and a few other things, but that's basically what we're building out right here. So let's go ahead and work on these. And with Zod, basically, you're going to say this is going to be a type of string. And that means if you put a number in here or an object or an array or something like that, it will scream at you and say, hey, you did the wrong thing here. So that's all we're going to do here. Although you could do a little extra. If you wanted to, you can come in here and do like max, and this is telling it how many characters it can be. So you can say like 60 characters and then pass it a message, and that will actually fire for you automatically. Now, I'm not going to go through all the things that Zod can do, but if you're interested, there is some kind of link somewhere to the Zod documentation, I think right here, or actually I think it's up here, that will actually walk you through how to use each of these. They also give a bunch of examples right here as well. You don't have to know a lot about TypeScript to just understand I'm saying this has to be a string, I'm saying that this is optional, that kind of stuff. All right, so let's actually build this out the way we want it to be done. So in my case, I do want a title, but next I want a description. And this will be a z.string, and maybe I'll just grab the same thing since we've already got it, and I'll do something like 160 characters, and I'll say it has to be 160 or less. Now, I want 3 other things, but for now, let's just do one more, and that would be a date, and this will just be z dot, you guessed it, date, just like that. All right, so now I've got these things. What I'll do is just go ahead and copy this over to post number 1, and then remember in this markdown file, we need a front matter section. This will be our title, and this could be whatever, and then description, we could do the same, and then for the date, this actually needs to be a date. All right, so there we go. We've got title, description, and date. So let me go ahead and just stop this right here, and we'll rerun this. And you'll notice a couple things. Number one, if I come up top here, this red squiggly line should go away eventually, because now it's basically generating these types down here, and that's what it was looking for. And you can see how now it's gone away. I'll come over here now and sync. Nothing much happens over this way. But if I were to mess this up, and for instance, instead of a string here, I put a bunch of numbers and hit save, and I was referencing this, it would actually error out for me. So maybe I should show you how to do that. Let's come over here to index, and up top here, we're going to say const, and we'll just call this posts equals get collection, like that, from Astro get content collections. We need to await this, and then you'll notice that it actually gives me posts here as an option. So if I go ahead and save this, you'll see that now I actually say, hey, this has to be a string, but I received a number. So just second to none when it comes to DX. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and move this back just so that it works properly. So we got ahead of ourselves a little bit with this, so just forget this for now. We'll come back to that when we're ready. All right, so we've got our first content type defined. Now, before we go ahead and add a bunch of other posts, there are a couple other things I want us to think about. Number one, we want to reference other data. So if I jump back over here, you'll notice that we said that we could reference like an author that would point to one of these, or we could have a referenced posts that points to other posts that might be connected to it. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll call it something like a related posts. Now, all I want to do is basically reference other posts in this collection. So I'm going to say z.array reference, and here I just want to reference my posts. Now this reference method or function is actually part of Astro content, so I need to go ahead and pull that in up top, and you'll see that the IntelliSense just gave me that automatically. All right, so let's get a little bit more room, and I am going to say that this can be optional, so you don't have to include it, but you can if you want. Now, the way that this reference works is you're actually going to point it to the ID of whatever this collection is. Now, again, let's pretend we didn't do this, all right? But now that we have, let me go ahead and show you what we're getting back. So right here, you can see that I've got an extension. It's called Console Ninja. Down this way, it's actually giving me this immediately in my code editor. This is what I'm getting back. It's an array of objects that have an ID, which is the name of the file, a slug, which by default is the name right here of the file, just without the extension, the body, which would be anything below the front matter. I don't have anything there yet. The collection it's a part of, posts, and then all the data, which is the front matter itself. Here I've got the title, the description, and the date, just like I would expect. So in order to reference another collection, you have to pass it either the slug if it's a content type or the ID if it's a data type. So if I come back over this way, I can say related posts, and then this is an array of strings, and I'm just going to pass it the slug of another content item. So in this case, it could be like post 2. Now I don't have that yet, so it should yell at me, and it does, because there's only a post 1, there's no post 2. But all I have to do is create one. So let's go ahead and do that. And I'll just come over here and let's just duplicate this right here. We'll call this post 2. Now this post 2 could reference post 1. And I'll come in here and say title 2 and something 2. All right, just to make sure we're getting something else. Now if I come back over this way to my index, wherever that was, and I look back at this console log, you'll see I'm now getting 2. And inside here, I've got related post. It's pointing to the slug 2, and it tells me that it's the type of collection posts. So that would be if I want to manually call out, hey, I want this post to be shown also on this page or something like that. Now, honestly, where I use reference types the most is not referencing other content types, but referencing other data types. So let's go ahead and create another data type. In this case, we're going to have an author. And remember, we have to define the collection. We'll give it this a type, and this time we wanted this to be a type of data, which means it has to be a JSON file or a YAML file. So it's not going to have content, it's just going to have metadata. Then we can define a schema. So z.object. We're going to pass it this object that's a schema telling us exactly what can be in those data files, what has to be there. So we'll have a few things. We'll have a name, which is z.string, and this will be required everything's required unless you say it's optional. Then we'll have a bio as well. This will be z.string. We'll also have an email. This will be a z.string as well. And you can actually do a little bit more validation if you get more in depth with this job, but for now, just to keep things simple, we'll just leave it as a string. Now we're also going to have a role for each of these. So these are different like roles that they might have, like a software, design, or marketing team. So what we're going to do is do an enum. And what this says is it has to be one of these items, exactly one of these items, spelled this exact same way, same capitalization, same everything. So we'll say software, design, and marketing. Now finally, I'm going to have an image for each of these people. So with that, we can use Astro's image component. Astro actually gives you a helper if you come in here and you pass in an image like this and make the z.object something that's returned from here. You can now come in here and have an image. So for instance, I could have, we'll call it headshot, and this will just be my image function that I passed in right there. I do need to have a comma there so that everything shows properly. So there you go. Now we have a new type of collection. This is an author type, which means I need an author folder. In fact, I think I wanted to call this team. So team, and then let's come over this way and let's go ahead and create that. So we'll say team. And I'm just going to paste in this first example. So you can see I've got name, Carol Witt, bio, here's the string. Then I've got a headshot. This is a relative reference to an image. I'll drag in just a second. The role, it has to be one of those three, and then an email. So string, 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 and then this is the image. Well, I guess this isn't a string. That was what, the enum, right? Yeah, so one of these options right here. Now, I've referenced this relative to the actual file here, which means I can just drag a image directly in this team directory. So there we go, just like that. There's Carol's image, and now this is referenced directly. Now we did all that, we set all that up so that we can also have another property on the post that points to that relatively, because that's really where I find this reference most helpful. So for instance, I can have an author, and this is going to point to my team. So I'll say reference, and this will be my team. Now, since we added another type of content collection, I need to come in here and npm run dev to get this up and running again. And now I'm going to get yelled at since I haven't actually added that, but you can see how now it's already working for me. So let's go ahead and open up our post one, and we need to add an author. So author like this, and now I'm just going to reference the actual ID. So that would simply be Carol Witt, like that. Now for now, let's just pretend she's written both of these posts, so I'll add her there as well. Before we go any further, let's go ahead and start rendering some of this on the page. All right, we've got this post collection right here. I might also want an authors collection at some point, but for now, what I'm going to do is take these posts and just loop through them below. For now, let's go ahead and get rid of this h1. I'm going to replace it with a div with the class of home page. Then we'll have a div inside here that has an h1 that says content collections overview. Below here, we'll have another div, and this is where we're going to put our different posts. In fact, I want this to have a class, so I'll give this a class of post wrapper. This section will have an h2 of posts, and then we'll have a div here with posts right here. So this post is what we're getting from up top. This would be all of our posts right here, and we're going to now loop through this data, as you can see, and we're going to loop through this and output this data right here on our homepage. So I'll come over here and take my posts and just map over these posts. And for each post, for now, let's just return a post and watch this IntelliSense automatically. I'll give you a little bit more room. You can see just with the dot, now I see everything I have available. Well, I want the data and then dot again, and now I want the title. So just like that. Now you can see I get title 1 and title 2. Nothing looks pretty yet. We'll fix that here in just a second. So let's go ahead and open the sidebar, and let's do a couple things just to pretty this up just a touch. So I'm going to come over here. We're going to add a new folder here. We'll call this layouts. And then we'll add one more. We're going to call this style. In this layouts folder, I'll add something called base layout.astro. And then I'm going to just paste all of this from the repo. Now, if you're interested in this, you can just grab the link in the description and you can follow along by pasting this as well. But basically all we're doing is creating a wrapper that has a navigation and then also has kind of the main body. And this is where everything will go for each of the pages. Now I also referenced this styles sheet, which is not there. So first of all, this needs to be called styles. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a file in here called main.css. And then once again, so we can focus on content collections, you could just paste all this in. It's not the prettiest CSS, but it basically will do just enough for us to be able to wrap everything. So with those two files created, let's now get rid of a lot of this stuff, and we're just going to wrap everything we've got right here inside of that main wrapper. So I'll come up here. We'll just reference base layout like this, and I have the Astro extension, which hopefully you have by this point, but that will just import that automatically up top for me. Now I can just drop all this in, and this will basically fit directly into the slot right here. So it's dropping everything directly inside of here. All right, so this at least makes it look a little bit better, and that should be good to go. Okay, so now what we want to do is output each of these items. Now I can do this all inline right here, but generally speaking, you want to do this in another component. So let's go ahead and do that. And so I'm going to come over here and create another file. So right over here in the SRC, we're going to call this components. And I will call this postcard.astro. Then what we'll do is come over to this index, and instead of passing this to just p.data.title, I'm going to actually pass this to my post card. Now, if you don't see this IntelliSense happening automatically, you can do one of two things. Either hit Control and Spacebar, that should show it for you. And if that doesn't work, you can refresh VS Code. Sometimes I find reloading it is necessary. Now, what I'm going to do is pass the entire post directly to here. So we could just call this something like post, and I'll just pass it the P. All right, because that's what I happen to call it right here. Now, I thought that imported it for me, but I don't see that it has. So let me come up here, and it looks like that also killed our server. So let me get that back up and running. All right, now we did all that just to kind of separate concerns here so that this postcard can handle all the fetching we need to do. Now, I may not want to pass all of these. I may want to just pass the first 3. So I can do that easily with a slice. So let's slice 0 to 3. And I'll pass that on here. So only the top 3 are going to get in here. Now in this case, I only have 2 so far, but let's come over here. Now what I can do is capture that here in the front matter. And this is how you use content collections, whether it's the type of content or the type of data to actually render stuff on your site. Now, what am I getting in here? Well, let's go ahead and console.log, astro.props. We called that post, I believe. If I save this, Console Ninja gives me this. Let's go ahead and just look at the actual output so that you can see it. So I'm actually getting here an ID, slug, body, collection, and all this data, the front matter, for each of the posts. Now I just have 2, so it's passing each of those to me. There's number 2, this is number 1. So I know I'm getting all of this data back. So let's go ahead and capture that here. And instead of typing out astro.props over and over again, let's just destructure that from astro.props. Now that post gives me a bunch of things, but what I want is just the stuff from the data for now. So I'll say const. So grab the author, description, title, and date. We'll just grab all this from post.data. Now you'll notice I'm not actually getting any IntelliSense here, and that's because it doesn't know what type this is. If I hover, it just says any. So it doesn't understand when you pass it from one place to the other that it's still a content collections type. But there's actually a couple helpers they give you. I'm just going to point to the main one, although you can do a bunch of powerful stuff with some of the new helpers they have for TypeScript as well. But I can just say type of props here, and we'll just say that the post is of a collection entry, and I'm just going to pass it posts. If you're not familiar with TypeScript, all I'm doing is basically using this helper that's going to define the entry right here with the actual type I've defined in my config. So this is like a function where I'm passing it the name of the thing that it's defining. So this is a more generic kind of description of it. So it could be one of my team members, it could be post, or anything else I want. And you'll notice here, in fact, it says post or team. Those are the only 2 I have. And I say, hey, this is the type of post. That means everything here for my props is going to be a type of post. Now when I come in here, you'll see it's actually giving me that IntelliSense that knows what it is. And now each of these things do the same exact thing. Okay, so cool. So I've got all that set up and ready to go. So let's come down this way. We're going to have articles for each of these. And these will just have a class of post card. And then we'll have an upper div here with an H2 that just has the title directly in here. And immediately there you see my title 1 and my title 2. So both of these set up and ready to go. Now, just to make this a little bit more interesting, I'm going to grab in 2 sets of things. I'm going to grab in all the posts from the repo and everything inside the team folder, because hopefully now you know how to build these out. So I'm not going to type those out all for you. I'll just drag them in and be right back with you. All right, so there we go. We got all 5 posts, and then I've also got updated team items as well. And I've actually updated the titles on some of these as well. I just dragged in everything you'll see in the repo directly inside of here. Now, here's the real power of content collections. Now I got type safety for all this stuff. Not only does it make sure that I have correct data, but it's really easy to loop through. So let's have another div here with the class of meta, and eventually we'll have the author data inside of here. But for now, I also just want to have like the date and time of stuff. So you can use a time tag right here. And what I want is the date. Now I should be getting this right up here from the front matter from each of the posts. Now here's the cool thing, because it knows it's a date, I get access to all the date methods. So here I can just say to ISO string, which is how you do this. So here I'll just say to ISO string. And then as far as what's displayed here, I want my date. And we'll do to locale date string right here. And this is part of the internationalization API, which is super helpful. You can pass undefined as far as the locale if you want it to be based on wherever people are coming from in their browser. And then I can pass it like date style and just pass it something like medium. And then for the time zone, I'll pass it UTC. And the reason I'm doing UTC here is because I didn't specify a time zone or something like that when I define the dates. So if I come back over here to like post 3, you can see I just have an actual date. If I don't put this UTC, it's going to basically subtract my time zone from it. So it may not be the exact same date as I have in the front matter. So this just ensures that it's all the same. But notice right away, I've got this October 1st, which is just like this. And if I were to inspect this right inside here, you'll notice that I also have this ISO string right here. And that's because I'm doing this method on it to ISO string. So really helpful to know that it's a date, not only just to be accurate, but also because you get access to all those methods without having to look them up. You just get it directly in VS Code IntelliSense. Now let's jump down here below here, and I might want a paragraph here with the description. And again, I should get that immediately with the IntelliSense. And you see I've got it right there. That's perfect. And then finally, I might want like a button to read more. Here we'll just have a link. And now this is important. I'm eventually going to create some routes, some dynamic routes that are at posts, and then whatever the slug happens to be. So I need to do it just like that, posts, and this will be post.slug. Now you don't specify that this is in a subdirectory of posts anywhere. So I could name this like gym or whatever. What matters is basically what's in this pages directory. I'm going to create a section in here called posts, and that's why I need posts. In other words, this is not the title that matters. It's basically wherever you're going to render it, where the subdirectory will be found. So I'm going to say posts. In this case, I'll just say read post. And finally, just to get some styling here from the CSS we've added, we'll add a class of button. So it's very quick and easy to template out data that you're getting from a content collection because you're not constantly going to look it up or make sure that it's correct. You know that these are all going to be links that point to the exact place, like post 3 or post 1 or post 2. You know that everything will have a description, that everything will have an exact date. All of this is super helpful, especially the bigger a project grows. Now here's the real power. It's adding in these reference data points. Remember, all I did, if I come back over here to like post 3 or post 1, all I did was point to an author. So I didn't add all their info up top. I just referenced that, and now I get access to everything connected to this author. Now you might think I could come in here and say something like, let's just do a paragraph. I could say like author dot ID. Well, that's fine, but notice what I'm going to get, just the ID name. You might say, well, I know what I can do. Wasn't there something else? Yes, it was collection. Well, that just tells me they're part of a team. So how do I actually get the data from this author? Well, you have to do another call now that you're in here and you have reference to this author. Inside here, I can actually get that very specific entry by using another helper, not the get collections that we used earlier, but what's called get entry. We'll just say author data or something like that equals await get entry. I'm just going to do this one right here, my team, and then I need to pass it the exact ID of the entry. Now remember, we got that on the author.id, right? So now it'll actually give me all the referenced data right here. Once again, if I go ahead and pull this up, I'll use that extension again. You can see now I've got the ID of Carol Witt, the collection she's in, and all of the data, including all the headshot data as well. Now, really, I don't care about the ID or the collection. I already know her ID. I already know the collection. I got that earlier. I just want the data. So I can actually be a little bit more intelligent about this and just go ahead and destructure this right here. It needs to be data, but then I can rename it here to author data. This is just normal JavaScript stuff. So I'm going to grab this author data right here. And now I just have the data for Carol Witt or whoever the person happens to be. That's what I'm going to use down here in the author type. So for instance, I might come in here and say I want the author data dot, and I have bio, email, headshot, and name. Let's just do the name. And now you can see I've got Carol Witt. I might also want to add a little span here that just has like that little dot. There you go. So it looks a little bit nicer. Now, the other thing I want is an actual image. I remember because I verified it's an actual image file, I can use the Astro image component. Now, once again, this intelligence tells me I can hit enter and it should import that up top. So I've got my image, I've got get entry, I've got the type collection. We've used that as well. Now I can come back down this way and say SRC. We'll grab the author data dot, and then here I want the headshot. Now for the alt, I can just grab the author data again, and I know it's dot name. And then finally, I'll go ahead and pass in a width just to set it at 25. Since this is essentially just a wrapper for a normal image tag in HTML, I can just pass anything I would pass to that. Now I've got Carol Witt, Jim Carnath, and James Lynn, and all those are being pulled in automatically for me and rendered and actually optimized by Astro's image component. It can do that because it knows that this is an actual image file. Now I want to do 3 more things. First, I want to actually create a posts route right here. So right now that does not exist. Let's go ahead and come over this way. Remember that those routes are all defined in pages. So I'm going to create a new folder called posts. Then inside here, we'll have a file. This will just be index.astro. So it's an index for the actual post itself. So I will grab my base layout. And you might say, hey, that was a lot of work to set up those post cards. Well, it was, but guess what? Now I can come in here and just say post wrapper like this. And then I'll have an H1 here of posts. And then below here, we'll have a div where I can just render out those posts. So how do I get those posts? Well, once again, I can come up here and say const posts, or I can call it whatever I want, but we need to await get collection, and I'm going to pass it the name of posts right there. Now I can come down here and simply loop over those. So we'll say post.map, we'll look at the post, and we'll just pull in the post card. And remember, we just have to pass the post to the post card. So just like that, if I save that and come back over here and refresh, now all these are just being pulled in automatically. So while it might be a little bit of work to set up these basic cards, once you have them, you can just use them anywhere, just as long as you're passing in a type of collection posts to them. Now, what if you said, hey, well, what if I wanted to pass in a type of team here? This is not going to work. Can you think of why? If I come over here to the post card, you'll notice that over here, I said this was a type of posts. So it knows it's supposed to get a post type. It's not supposed to get a team type. So again, that's another way in which this type safety really, really helps you. Change that back. And once I restart the dev server here, npm run dev, it should now actually work. So that's the first thing I wanted to show you. Now, the second thing I want to show you is how you render the content for a collection entry. Now, in this case, remember, we only have one type that's an actual content type, and that would be these posts right here. All the rest of this is just data file. So I want to render these posts at post 1, post 2, post 3, whatever those indexes are. So I'm just going to do that right over here, again, inside of this posts, and we'll have a dynamic endpoint. Let's just say something like slug.astro. Whatever you name this does affect how you write this, but it doesn't really matter what the name is over here. Now, I do want to do one more thing, and that is I'm going to add one more file here into this layouts folder. All right, this one right here, this markdown wrapper, again, you can grab this from the repo, but you'll notice that I'm just grabbing front matter here from whatever gets passed in, and then I'm rendering out everything here. So the title and then the slot below. Now, I'm doing that intentionally so that we can use it for a couple different use cases, but for now, all you need to know is that we're going to drop all the content of those posts directly in this slot. So back over this way, we're going to look for the markdown wrapper. And now that we have this dynamic endpoint, it really depends on how we're building. So if we're building this server side, it will be rendered each time, so I don't need to generate these paths ahead of time. So in order to do that, you need to actually export a function called getStaticPaths. So we'll say export async function, getStaticPaths, and then we're going to do something very familiar. We're just going to grab our posts from await get collection. Hopefully you're getting this by now. Get collection, this will just be called posts. Then I simply want to return from here a list of all the different post possibilities. So my posts.map, I'm going to pass each entry. You can name that whatever you want, but in my case, I'll just call it entry. And then because I'm returning an object here, I need to wrap it in parentheses, and I'm just going to pass two things. First of all, the params. This will be an object with the slug, and I'm calling it slug because that's what I passed it up here. So this is, in other words, like whatever's after the slash posts, in this case, post 1. So what I want to do is pass then the entry dot slug, and I'm getting this from the content collection. So just like we got before, each of these will be an object with an ID, a slug, a body, a collection, and then all the data or the front matter. Now, I've got the params. The other thing I want is whatever props need to be passed in. In this case, I just want the entire entry to be passed in as a prop so that I've got access to it down here on the page. Now, I don't need to do anything with the params. I'm just telling it that I have this many posts because I'm building them ahead of time. However many are in this collection, post 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's how many you need to build. So it's built all these. Now for each of them, I'm going to get access to this props inside of here. So here I'm just going to say const, and I want to destructure the entry. That's what I passed in right here. And this will be from astro.props. All right, now I'm getting an error, and that's because I need to add an equal sign right there. Now, the way this markdown wrapper works, I have to actually pass it a couple of things. I have to pass it a title and description. So my title here, I would get from the actual entry itself. Remember, this will have data. Now, right now it thinks it's a type of any. We know how to fix that, right? So I can just do type of props like this, and I'll say entry. The thing I'm actually getting is a collection entry, and the type of collection it is my posts. Now, this knows that it's an entry type, and you can see I get all this. So what I want to pass is the title right here. So I can pass this here in a couple of ways, but I could do entry.data.title like that, and it should pass that along. And it should pass that along, but actually I think if I remember right, didn't we say it was going to be front matter? Yeah, so what I want to do is pass around all the data, along all the data to here, and then it will take care of adding those there. So let's just come back down here. Instead of doing this as title, we'll call this front matter, since that's what it's expecting. We'll just pass it all the data. All right, so just like that, it's actually working for us. And now what we have to do is render out all the content below. Now, right inside here, the way we're going to render this content is we actually get a couple of other things with this entry. All right, so let's go ahead and just console log this entry right here, and maybe let's open it up down below. You'll see in addition to everything I've shown you already, we also actually get a render function, which will render the contents. So what I'm going to do is actually abstract that out. So we'll say const, and it's an actual Astro component it gives you called content, and you're going to get this from await entry.render. Then what we're going to do is just dump the content in directly here. So this component right here is an Astro component that's been rendered from all the text, and you can see it shows up just that way. Now, how is this actually getting in here? Well, remember we've got this markdown wrapper wrapping everything. This is the slot. So whatever I pass in here as the content will come in right here. So I've got the title already coming in from the front matter that I passed in, and now I've got the slot showing up right over here. Now we can do one better. If I come over here to the post card that we already created, let's duplicate a lot of our work over here. So I'm going to grab all of this, actually right here, this meta tag, and let's go ahead and drag that over this way. So right in here, right above the content, let's go ahead and render this meta. Now we're going to need to do a few things. Number one, I need to pull in that image component. Then this author data was all from the collection entry I got. So if I come back over here, you might remember what we had to do is grab the actual entry from the author. So I can do that. come back over here. We're going to grab all that as well. So the data from get entry, which I need to pull in as well, the team, and then the author.id. This I'm getting from the entry. This is the actual post itself, .data.author.id, right? Because the author ID was connected to that. Now, the other thing I need to do is for each of these, now they're not date now, it's entry.data.date. Now, I can abstract all this if I want to up top, but we'll just leave it just like that. And now you see I get all that reworked. So obviously this would probably be another component you would abstract out, but just for sake of time, I just copied it over this way. Now we're looking at post 1, but this would work for any of these posts. If I come into post 2, same thing here, come over here, post 3. So it's just dynamically rendering it for each of these, basically whatever params are being passed in here, which is each of the individual slugs I'm getting for my posts collection. Then I'm doing another call for the actual author data from the entry that's referencing the team dataset. Now let's do one final thing, and let's go ahead and reuse our post component as well. Remember, just like with the author, we actually have to do some additional work. So remember, right here we had to get the actual entry. We have to do the same exact thing for these related posts. So there's another option we have, and let's just call this whatever right now. We'll say await, and this is now get entries. Now what would this be? This would be entry.data.related posts, right? Now this may not exist for all of them, so perhaps let's do a little check first. So what we're going to do is say, if this exists, then let's go ahead and await entries. Otherwise, let's just pass back an empty array. So we know we'll either have an empty array or we'll have it filled with actually related posts. So let's actually call this something useful. Let's call this related posts. And then we can come down below here and render this out as you might expect. So we'll say rendered related posts. Let's just go ahead and check the length of it. So if the length is greater than 0, then we're going to output this bit of text. So this will be a div with the class of post wrapper. And then this should look very familiar. We'll have related posts, another div, and then inside of here, we'll actually loop through those related posts. So related posts.map, we'll have a post, and for each post is have our post card. We're going to pass the post here, and since we named it P, we'll just pass it as P. That means if I scroll down this way, we should have related posts, right? And we're getting multiple use cases out of these cards on the home screen, on the post screen, on each of these individuals that have posts. And if they don't have a post, for instance, if I come over here, this one doesn't have a post, it doesn't have this section because it's just going to be passing along this empty array right here. All right, so that's the second thing I wanted to show you. First thing was the post page. Second thing was how to render individual pages, which got us a chance to look at this content and also how to do these kind of sub-nested get entry or get entries once again. Now there's just two more things I want to show you, both of which are very brief. First of all, like I've been mentioning all along, you don't have to actually render content, markdown content from content collections. I just think you miss a lot if you don't. There's not a huge advantage. In fact, you lose a lot of power and control if you just have markdown files. But I could, for instance, just drag in another folder in here. For instance, let's have a folder, we'll call this like markdown routes, maybe something like that. And I'm going to drag in this sample file. Now with markdown content, notice that I've got a title and description. There's no way of checking this anywhere. So if I have multiples of these files and I expect them all to be the exact same, I have to manually go check them. If I misspell an author's name, like let's say this is an author and it doesn't have a capital S but a lowercase s, well now I just created two new authors on my site where really it should be the same one. Notice I just have to pass a relative path to the layout, and we're going to use that same markdown wrapper just to make it simple. But now I can come over here, and without doing any work, I can say markdown routes and look at sample, and there's my post. So it's got all this post stuff here. I don't have any way of like rendering out related posts unless I did that in the wrapper. So this is the benefit of not using content collections, but you also miss all the stuff that's really valuable about content collections. It's a little bit of setup, but especially once your site gets anywhere of any significant size at all, it's a huge, huge help. So that's the third thing. And the fourth and final thing I wanted to show you was just one more content collection to show you a couple of other options with it. So if I come down here, we've got the team. Let's also then look at those services. So once again, we're going to define a collection. And once again, this will be a type of data. We've then got a schema. This will be z.object. And if I scroll down this way, I'm just going to go ahead and paste this in. We've got a title, description, contact, which references a team member, whether or not it's available. This would be a Boolean. And then we've got certain tags that they can connect with. Now that, you know what that means, I need to come over here and add another folder called services. Then I'm simply going to drag these over here so that I've got multiples of these services. Some of them are available, some of them are not. Now that's actually what I want to show you is how you can actually filter based off certain criteria. So let's come back out to our index page. And up top here, I want to go ahead and grab my services. I'll just await, get collection. This will be the type of services. All right, so now that I got these services, I can go ahead and just console log them, and that should be showing them to me once I come over here. Yeah, there they are. So all my services, let's see, undefined. Let's see what's going on. Let's open back up the config right over here, services. And aha, so this folder was in the wrong place. You probably already saw that, but let's move this over here. Now they should be in the right place, and eventually that should pull in. Okay, so there we go. We've got all our services. Now all of them are showing up, even if they have availability set to false. So here's where this filter comes in. In addition to the name that you get for the get collections, you can also pass in a function that's a filter function. You can call this whatever you want, but I'm just going to call them each entries. And then what I'm going to do is just say, basically, give me back an entry if some certain metadata is false or true. So for instance, I could come in here and say if the entry.data.available, if that's true, then go ahead and pass back true. Otherwise, pass back false. So just like that, if I now await and get this back, and maybe what I should do here just to make it cleaner, we'll say console.log services.length. And now I've got 3. If I don't pass this in, you can see I've got 5. So I have 2 that are marked as false. But did you know you can render stuff differently whether you're in production or whether you're in dev? Now this is because Astro uses Vite, and Vite gives you access to whether or not you're in production or development. So I could say import.meta.env.prod. If that's the case, then go ahead and give me entry.data.available. In other words, only pass the things that are actually available. Otherwise, if I'm in dev mode, just pass me everything. I want to see it all. Now you can see I get 5 here. Now what I could do is come right in here and let's just duplicate this. And I don't need this class here of post wrapper. Let's come in here though and say services we offer or something like that. And then here this will be a UL. I'm just going to loop through all my services so we won't slice anything off. And for each service, which I'll just call it S, I'll pass this to an LI. This will just be my s.data.title. To make sure this renders correctly, I'm going to add a role of list item, since that's how I have my CSS. And you can see that's what I've got right over here. Okay, so all these are being rendered out. This would be in development mode, right? Because all of these are being shown. Now what I want to do is stop this here, and we'll just do npm run and build. We'll actually build this so it'll be in production mode as it builds. Now whenever you build locally, you can actually check what that would look like with npm run preview. So this is now not running off the dev server, it's running off those built files. So whatever is in this dist folder right here. If I come over here, you'll notice that now I've only got 3 showing. That's because it built using the production mode. So you can check everything, make sure it's working properly in dev mode, and then still build exactly only the things you want to build in production mode. You can do that all with this little entry filter. All right, so as promised, it was a fairly fast walkthrough, but hopefully that gave you a sense of the power of content collections, how to use them, why you might want to use them, and gave you some new ideas, even if you've been using content collections for some time. Again, if you're interested more in Astro and want to learn from me, I've got a course coming out soon at learnastro.dev. Check it out, and I'd love for you to sign up for early access and 50% off the final price. All right, thanks. I'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Happy coding.